The bed was empty, the blanket thrown back, but the one who had been sleeping there just hours earlier was no longer in the apartment. December 26, 1996, around 6 a.m. Boulder, Colorado. Patsy Ramsey comes downstairs and finds 3 handwritten pages on the steps, a 2.5-page note demanding $118,000, a warning not to call the police, and a threat of irreversible consequences. Patsy finished reading and rushed upstairs. JonBenet had vanished from her room in the middle of the night, and just the evening before, nothing had hinted at any of this. The family had returned from a Christmas dinner at the home of their friends Fleet and Priscilla White, who hosted the Ramseys every year. At that time, John Ramsey was the head of Access Graphics, a major IT distributor under Lockheed Martin, and that very year, revenue had surpassed $1 billion for the first time. Patsy, a former Miss West Virginia and Miss America contestant. And JonBenet, at just 6 years old, had already won several beauty pageants, including Little Miss Colorado, photogenic, accustomed to cameras and spotlights. So Patsy dialed 911. And from that moment on, everything that could go wrong did go wrong. Officers did a cursory sweep of the house and cordoned off exactly one room, JonBenet's bedroom, because at that point, they believed it was a kidnapping and left everything else open. Friends, relatives, and the family's pastor were already moving freely through the house, touching surfaces, rearranging items, and the forensic picture was being destroyed in real time. One officer went down to the basement, reached a door with a wooden latch locked from the inside, paused and turned around. The logic was simple. If someone had exited through that door, they couldn't have latched it from the other side. As it would later turn out, JonBenet was right behind it. The note promised a call from the kidnappers by 10 a.m. No call came. Detective Linda Arndt was by then the only officer on scene. Around 1 in the afternoon, she asked John Ramsey and his friend Fleet White to walk through the house and check for anything unusual. John started in the basement, opened that very door. And seconds later, a scream came from below. He came upstairs carrying his daughter, tape on her face, a makeshift ligature around her neck, cord on her wrists. He removed the tape, brought her upstairs, and laid her on the living room floor. And each of those actions was irreversible. The forensic examination would later determine that the cause was asphyxiation combined with a severe cranial injury. And what everyone had been searching for all morning had been located just 30 meters from where police had been speaking with the family. From this point forward, the central question, one that would go unanswered for 12 years, became this. If everything happened inside the house, why was there a ransom note at all? In the case file, that note would occupy a special place, not because of its content, but because of how it was written. But first, the text itself. The author identified himself as part of a, quote, 0 signed off with, quote, 1. The note turned out to be long, at times theatrical, with references to lines from popular movies. According to FBI analysts, writing it would have taken no less than 21 minutes. All of it inside someone else's home at night, while the family slept upstairs. The note and a draft were written with the same marker, a Sharpie from the Ramsey kitchen. The paper came from Patsy's notepad, also from the house. A draft remained in the pad. The word __, quote _2, __, and the beginning of a vertical stroke resembling the letter __, quote _3, __. Someone had started, stopped, and rewritten the whole thing. The only fingerprints found on the note and the pen belonged to Patsy and the officers who later handled them. And here is what would become pivotal for investigators. Real kidnappers don't write notes on site, they bring them. They don't leave the victim inside the house. And they don't demand an amount that matches the exact figure of the homeowner's annual bonus, $118,000, precisely what John Ramsey received that year. That number had never appeared in any publication. The only way to know it was by knowing the family personally. Handwriting analysts tested samples from everyone who had access to the house. More than 70 people were ruled out. John was excluded entirely, but one person was never ruled out. The skull fracture, 22 centimeters long, running from the occipital to the frontal region, appeared to be the obvious cause. But the examination on December 27th revealed something different. The cause of the fatal outcome was asphyxiation, a makeshift ligature fashioned from nylon cord, tightened around JonBenét's neck and secured to a wooden handle. And that handle turned out to be part of a paintbrush. The brush end was found in the basement in a box of Patsy Ramsey's paints. The lower third, believed to have been used in the attack, was never recovered despite several days of searching. The construction of the ligature required skill. The cord was tied with a specific knot, characteristic of someone experienced with ropes, though the knot alone proved nothing. The examination also documented evidence of a sexual assault without trace evidence, and fragments of wood from the brush were found during the inspection. But there was one more detail that didn't seem critical at the time. In JonBenét's stomach, investigators found remnants of pineapple. The pieces were large with clean edges, barely touched by digestion, consumed shortly before the incident, after the family had returned from dinner at the Whites. A bowl of pineapple with a spoon sat on the kitchen counter. Neither John nor Patsy recalled anyone leaving it there or giving their daughter the fruit. The question of who fed JonBené that night would become one of the most important in the case, and the answer would be linked to her older brother. Up to this point, the investigation had no clear direction, but Boulder police made up their minds quickly. Statistics showed that in 12 out of 13 cases where a victim is found deceased inside a home, someone from the inner circle is responsible. No signs of forced entry. The note was written with materials from the house. No outsider could have known John's bonus amount by chance. Everything pointed inward. But the first formal interviews didn't take place until 4 months later, in April 1997, by which point the family had hired attorneys with strict conditions, separate interviews, defense counsel present, the right to review testimony. For police, it looked like an attempt to synchronize their stories. For the public, it was practically an admission of guilt. Detective Steve Thomas, assigned to lead the case, built a specific theory. Patsy had struck her daughter that night, possibly over a wet bed. A package of pull-ups was found in the room. A crumpled red sweater lay on the floor, even though Patsy claimed she had put JonBené to bed wearing it. Yet the child was found in a white t-shirt. As it would later emerge before this case, Thomas had worked in the narcotics unit and had never handled an investigation of this kind. To pressure the family into talking, investigators began leaking case materials to the press. And a media storm erupted. Photographs of JonBené, accusations against the mother, and a growing sense that every refusal to submit to questioning only confirmed guilt. But one person was looking in a different direction and saw what everyone else had missed. Later, in a video diary, Lou Smith would admit he had been certain the parents were involved, and had even joked to his daughter that if anyone had broken into the house, it must have been Santa Claus through the chimney. In March 1997, District Attorney Alex Hunter hired him as an independent expert, a retired detective from El Paso County with more cases behind him than anyone, each ending in a conviction. The assumption was that Smith would confirm the police theory and close the chapter. But the deeper he dug into the evidence, the more clearly he saw what others had walked right past. The basement window, the one John Ramsey had once broken to get into his own house, was open when patrol arrived. A suitcase sat beneath it, as though used as a step. On the wall, a shoe print, later identified as a high-tech brand boot, that matched no one in the family, no officer, and no forensic technician. On the wine cellar door, an unidentified palm print that didn't belong to any of the Ramseys. In the guest bedroom on the second floor, a rope in a paper bag. And the family said the item didn't belong to them. Smith dug wider. In the months before that night, the neighborhood had seen a string of break-ins. And within a 3-kilometer radius of the house, 38 registered offenders resided. The theory of an outsider wasn't a fantasy. It had tangible physical foundations. And among those living nearby, one individual drew particular concern, a man just 2 blocks from the Ramseys. On the bowl of pineapple, investigators found the fingerprints of Burke, JonBenét's older brother, who was 9 at the time. Police and prosecutors twice, in 1999 and 2016, officially stated that he had never been a suspect, and under Colorado law, charges could not have been brought against him regardless. But in September 2016, CBS aired the documentary project The Case of JonBenet Ramsey, in which a team of experts, former FBI agents, forensic specialists, profilers, constructed a theory that the brother had allegedly struck her, possibly with a flashlight, over the pineapple, and the parents then staged the kidnapping. The first episode drew more than 10 million viewers. Burke filed a $750 million lawsuit, and in January 2019 the parties reached a settlement. The terms were never disclosed. So while theories about the family collapsed one after another, one man had already written a letter from behind bars, and in it was something no Ramsey could have known. By October 1997, the police file contained more than 1,600 names, and Lou Smith was methodically checking every person who had ever been inside the house, knew the layout of the rooms, or had access to information about the family. Two individuals stood out in particular. The first, Bill McReynolds, a retired journalism professor from the University of Colorado, who had played Santa Claus at the Ramseys' Christmas parties 3 years running. A few days before that night, JonBenet had given him a vial of gold glitter. He later told reporters he brought it with him to heart surgery. For luck. His wife, Janet, turned out to have her own oddity. She had written a play whose plot involved an assault on a young girl in the basement of her own home. Both provided samples. The DNA didn't match, and as police sources later confirmed, the McReynolds were never seriously considered. The second, Linda Hoffman Pugh, the family's housekeeper, who had a key to the house and complete knowledge of the layout, including the basement. Shortly before Christmas, she had asked Patsy for $2,500 for rent, and in her home, investigators found duct tape of the same brand as that found on JonBenet's face. But the DNA from the scene belonged to a male. Hoffman Pugh, by definition, could not have been the source. Both leads went cold, but the sheer scale of the list demonstrated one critical point. Dozens of people had access to the house and to information about the family, and far from all of them had been fully investigated. 11 months after that night, an event would occur just blocks from the Ramsey home, one that John would never forget. 9 months after that night, September 14, 1997, an attack took place 2 miles from the Ramsey home, and the parallels were too precise to ignore. The victim attended the Dance Fest studio, the same one where JonBenet had taken classes. In case files, she appears under the pseudonym Amy. That evening, her father was away on business. Amy and her mother had returned from a movie and didn't know someone was already inside the house. A man in black waited until the girl fell asleep, entered her room, and, according to her account, knew her name. The mother heard a noise, rushed to the bedroom, and saw a stranger standing over the bed. He fled through a window. The girl's injuries were serious. The father immediately saw the parallels. A nighttime intrusion, a stranger inside the home, the same Boulder neighborhood, the same dance studio. He hired a private investigator, Pete Peterson, who uncovered 19 burglaries and break-ins in the surrounding area over the span of 2 months. And near Amy's house, investigators found discarded Camel Blues cigarette packs, the same brand found in the alley behind the Ramseys. Police conducted a comparison and announced that prints from the two scenes didn't match, no connection established. The case remains unsolved. As John Ramsey himself would later say, in 2025, following the release of the Netflix documentary, there are serious indications that a link is possible, but police dismissed it from the very beginning, and in 1998, a grand jury would convene to decide whether to bring charges against the parents, and their verdict would become one of the most controversial decisions in the history of American justice. In Boulder, a grand jury assembled, 8 women and 4 men. For 30 months, they studied the case, inspected the house on 15th Street, heard testimony from Burke, who had turned 12 by then, and questioned JonBenet's half-siblings. Among the experts who testified were DNA specialist Barry Scheck and forensic scientist Henry Lee. District Attorney Alex Hunter appeared before the press and announced the evidence was insufficient for charges and the case was closed. For 14 years, this was accepted as truth. In January 2013, journalist Charlie Brennan of the Boulder Daily Camera published a report that upended the narrative. The jury had voted to indict, and both parents were charged with creating conditions that led to the child's passing and with aiding an unidentified individual. Hunter had unilaterally refused to sign. He believed he couldn't prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt, and under Colorado law, he had that right. Although the legal community would later call this decision, to put it mildly, unconventional, the statute of limitations on those charges expired in 2002, and Patsy, by that time, was already gone. She passed from cancer in 2006. By this point, the investigation was fractured beyond repair. Steve Thomas resigned in 1998, accusing the prosecutor's office of sabotage. Lou Smith left that same month, from the opposite end. In his letter to the district attorney was a phrase that would be quoted for years to come, ___, quote _4 _2. Investigators left the same case at the same time, one because he believed the guilty were going unpunished, the other because he believed the innocent were being targeted. Then came news that, for a few days, turned the entire case upside down. On June 24, 2006, Patsy Ramsey passed away. Ovarian cancer, which she had fought for more than 10 years, had returned, and she never lived to see her family cleared of suspicion. 2 months later, on August 17th in Bangkok, authorities arrested 41-year-old American John Mark Carr, a former schoolteacher who had been working in Thailand at the time, while evading charges in California for possession of prohibited materials. Carr claimed he was involved in what happened to JonBenet and had been saying so for several years to a journalist with whom he'd been corresponding since 2002. According to his version, he had been with her that night, had given her substances, and everything ended in what he called an accident. The news spread instantly. For several days, it seemed the case was finally solved, but the moment they started verifying, the story fell apart. His confession contained not a single detail that only someone inside the house could have known. The forensic examination found no substances in JonBenet's system. Witnesses placed Carr in Alabama at the time of the incident, and his DNA didn't match. On August 26th, the prosecution announced no charges would be filed. Carr turned out to be not involved, but obsessed. A man who had spent years collecting publicly available materials, constructing a fantasy, and at some point came to believe it himself. For John Ramsey, it was yet another blow. The system had once again shown it wasn't getting closer to an answer, and the only breakthrough in 10 years turned out to be one man's delusion. But 2 years later, something real would emerge. Not a confession, but evidence. And it would officially change the Ramsey story. In 2003, forensic scientists finally extracted a complete DNA profile from a mixed sample found on JonBenet's undergarments, a male profile matching no family member and none of the 1.5 million entries in the federal CODIS database. The same genetic material was found under JonBenet's fingernails. By all indications, she had fought back. For 5 years, this data sat untouched, until new District Attorney Mary Lacey applied a technology that simply didn't exist in 1996, so-called touch DNA, analysis of microscopic skin cells. Samples were taken from the waistband of JonBenet's pants, the areas where an attacker might have gripped while removing or adjusting clothing. The result matched the unknown male profile from the undergarments. On July 9, 2008, Lacey sent John Ramsey an official public letter. John, Patsy, and Burke were formally and completely excluded from the list of suspects, with an apology from the prosecution. It took 12 years to say those words, but the decision sparked debate. Former Boulder Police Chief Mark Beckner stated that clearing anyone on the basis of microscopic traces, which could end up on clothing during manufacturing or incidental contact, was unjustified. Other experts countered, the same profile appearing in multiple locations, on the undergarments, under the fingernails, could not be coincidence. That DNA profile exists, it's in the database, but the person it belongs to has never been found, and the very same question, who is he, is asked by a man whose letter surfaced from prison in 2019, containing a confession, but with one serious problem. Gary Oliva came to investigators' attention not through police initiative. He was turned in by a childhood friend. On December 27, 1996, the day after JonBenet was found, Michael Vale called the Boulder Police tip line and reported that the previous night, Oliva had called him in tears and said he had harmed a little girl. Vale gave the name and number. No one called back. 3 months later, he called again, but the call went to voicemail. Olive lived 13 houses away from the Ramsey family. He was a registered sex offender with a documented history. He had a habit of breaking into homes, a recorded attempt to harm his own family, and a known fascination with knots and ropes. In 2000, he was detained on a university campus. Found in his possession were a stun gun, a photograph of JonBenet, and a poem titled Ode to JonBenet. In 2016, he was arrested again. Nearly 700 images depicting child sexual abuse were found on his phone, along with over 300 photos related to JonBenet, including images from the forensic examination. He received a 10-year sentence for possession of illegal materials. From prison, Oliva began writing to Vale. And in 2019, one of these letters contained a direct confession. He wrote that he had never cared for anyone the way he cared for JonBenet, that he had let her slip away, that he had watched her fade, and called what happened an accident. Vale went to the police. The response was brief. They were aware of Oliva, had investigated his involvement, including several prior confessions. As it later emerged, the decisive factor was that Oliva's DNA did not match the unknown male profile found on JonBenet's clothing. Vale still believes police are placing too much weight on a sample that may have been contaminated on day one. Police maintain their position. Without a match, there's no case. Oliva was released early, and by November of that year, he had stopped reporting to his supervision officer and disappeared. In December 2024, a documentary would premiere on Netflix, and Boulder police would respond in a way they hadn't in nearly 30 years. On November 25, 2024, Netflix released a 3-part film, Cold Case: Who Took the Life of JonBenet Ramsey. And for the first time in years, John Ramsey told his version in detail on camera. The film didn't name a suspect, but it did something else. It systematically showed how Boulder police undermined the investigation in the first hours, months, and years. The response came the same day. The annual case update, typically published in December, was released a month early. Police Chief Steve Redfern recorded a 6-minute address in which he acknowledged the mistakes of 1996, but added, "Going back to that day is impossible. The goal now is one thing: to find the person responsible." And for the first time, police stated the scale in numbers. More than 21,000 tips, over 1,000 interviews across 19 states, more than 200 DNA samples, 1,500 items of physical evidence, plus collaboration with the FBI, the Colorado Bureau of Investigation, and several independent laboratories. John Ramsey sees it differently. According to him, several key items, the suitcase from the basement, the blanket, the rope from the guest bedroom, have still not undergone expanded DNA testing, and some evidence sent to labs back in the 90s was returned untested. No one has ever explained why. He filed a petition with the governor of Colorado requesting that analysis be transferred to an independent agency. His son, John Andrew, confirmed in September 2025 that items from the basement still haven't undergone forensic examination. But after a 30-minute meeting with Redfern, he said, "The process is slow, but there is movement. An official answer to who did it still doesn't exist. But if you assemble everything the investigation has accumulated over 28 years, what emerges is not a name, but a portrait. __, quote _6 __. That's how the note ends. And in 28 years, investigators have never established what the abbreviation means. There have been many theories: saved by the cross, a religious reference, Subic Bay Training Center, a naval base in the Philippines where John Ramsey once served, shall be the conqueror. And John himself offered his own interpretation, roughly translating to, "Try and catch me." None has been confirmed. The signature remains as opaque as on day one. The note says more about its author than he probably intended. The text begins formally, "Mr. Ramsey." By the end, the author switches to first name, 3 times in a row, John. Analysts noted immediately, this is too personal for a stranger. Whoever wrote it felt they were on familiar terms with John. The note is styled as a message from a group, we, our organization. But both investigators and FBI experts agreed on one point. It was written by a single individual, and the plural was a disguise. There are deliberate spelling errors that linguists interpreted as an attempt to conceal level of education. Certain phrases were identified as quotes from the action films Speed and Dirty Harry. The author constructed the note like a screenplay and didn't quite pull it off. One moment it shifts from businesslike to threatening, from formal to casual, and in the passages about the most terrible part, the exclamation marks vanish, as if the writer couldn't bring himself to shout about what had already happened, and it was precisely this detail that led experts to conclude the note was written after JonBenet had already lost her life. This wasn't a ransom demand. It was a staging. A document produced by someone who had never written anything like it before, trying to appear as someone they were not. That person is likely alive and has almost certainly followed every twist of the case for all 28 years. A house of nearly 5,000 square feet, 15 rooms across 4 floors, a basement with multiple compartments and a confusing layout, and not a single responding officer had experience with cases of this nature. Boulder, a college town just over 100,000 residents, where serious offenses were the exception, not the norm. Linda Arndt, who arrived around 8 that morning, would later say in an interview that she felt completely alone at a scene that demanded a team of dozens of specialists. The department declined assistance from the FBI and the Colorado Bureau of Investigation. From that moment, it became clear, this isn't a story about bad people, bad. It's a story about a system that was never built to handle what happened to it, and the person who did this likely knew about that vulnerability in advance. Somewhere, a man is living who left his DNA on JonBenet's clothing, a single male profile that has not matched any of the 200 samples tested. If he was an adult in '96, he's at least 50 now. He may have a family, and someone among his relatives has likely already submitted a saliva sample to a commercial DNA database. That's exactly how Joseph DeAngelo, the so-called Golden State offender, was identified in 2018. 44 years, a free man, a former police officer, tracked down not directly, but through a distant relative who uploaded a profile to a public database. Genetic genealogy built the family tree down to one person. Since then, this technology has solved dozens of cases across the country. Boulder police confirmed in December 2024 that they are working with experts and partners. And in December 2025, another update was released. New interviews, a re-examination of evidence, but still no specifics. C.C. Moore, the leading genetic genealogy specialist from Parabon Nanolabs, whose work has helped solve dozens of similar cases, stated plainly, even with the most minimal sample, she's ready to work. Somewhere in this country, a man with that profile wakes up every morning. He almost certainly knows the case is still open. He's almost certainly seen the documentary. He knows the technology is closing in. And he knows what no one else knows, what happened in the basement of the house on 15th Street on the night of December 26, 1996. But the hardest question in this case isn't whether they'll find him. It's something else entirely. He knew where the paintbrushes were kept in the basement. He placed the note exactly where Patsy walked every morning. He calculated almost everything, but there was one thing he couldn't have anticipated. In 1996, DNA analysis technology only worked with large samples, and what he left on JonBenet's clothing was microscopic, invisible to the eye. In 2008, it was confirmed a second time. And now, in the era of genetic genealogy, that profile could lead to a name. John Ramsey continues to give interviews and speaks of this person not as an abstraction, but as a specific man who left his DNA in multiple locations. And the note he wrote that night has long ceased to be evidence in the ordinary sense. It has become his self-portrait. He left behind more than he ever realized, and everything he left behind is waiting. The question isn't who, the question is when. Thanks for watching. What do you think about this video? Write in the comments, hit like, subscribe to our channel. See you next time.